Good morning. It is September the 27th, 2020. You can now relax and be informed. Here is your daily bite of news. Russia and China blocked an official release of a report by the UN on Libya that accused its warring parties and their international backers, including Russia, of violating a UN arms embargo, UN diplomats said Friday. Germany's deputy UN ambassador Günther Sauter said he brought the issue to the Security Council after the two countries blocked the report's release by the committee monitoring sanctions on Libya, which Germany heads. The report said the arms embargo was being violated by Libya's UN-supported government in the West, which is backed by Turkey and Qatar and by rival East-based forces under Commander Khalifa Hifter, backed by the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and Jordan. The panel said the embargo remains totally ineffective. 11 companies also violated the arms embargo, including the Wagner Group, a private Russian security company that the panel said in May provided between 800 and 1,200 mercenaries to Hifter. In addition, warring parties and their international backers, along with Egypt and Syria, failed to inspect aircraft or vessels if they had grounds to believe the cargo may have contained weapons and ammunition, as required by a 2015 Security Council resolution. Tensions in oil-rich Libya escalated further when East-based Hifter launched an offensive in April 2019 trying to capture the capital, Tripoli. But Hifter's campaign collapsed in June when militias backing the UN-supported governments in Tripoli, with Turkish support, gained the upper hand, driving Hifter's forces from the outskirts of the capital and over western towns. The Security Council adopted a resolution on September 15th demanding that all countries enforce the wildly violated UN arms embargo on Libya and withdraw all mercenaries from the North African nation. It also extended the UN political mission in Libya and called for political talks and a ceasefire of war. One problem for the UN, though, has been the failure to replace its former top envoy, Ghassan Salam, who resigned in March. The new envoy could then focus on mediating with Libyan and international parties to end the conflict, but finding a replacement acceptable to all Security Council diplomats has proven exceedingly difficult. The U.S. imposed export restrictions on Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp., taking aim at another prominent Chinese technology company. U.S. firms must now apply for a license to export certain products to China's largest chip maker, the Commerce Department said in a letter dated September 25th. SMIC has not been put on the so-called U.S. Entity List, which means the restrictions are not yet as severe as those imposed on China's Huawei technologies. The SMIC decision was a compromise between the Department of Defense and Commerce and moderates in the Trump administration. As much as 50% of SMIC's equipment comes from the U.S., and the company has a market value of more than $29 billion. Hong Kong residents renewed or applied for British national overseas passports in record numbers last year as anti-government protest erupted in the city. 32,813 renewals were recorded by the end of June this year, the second highest number since 2006. The political unrest last year and the introduction this year of the security legislation has prompted many Hong Kong residents to plan an exit from the former British colony in search of more stability. There are an estimated 350,000 BNO passport holders in Hong Kong and about 2.5 million who are eligible for them. Iran lost $150 billion of revenue since U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal and reimposed sanction on its economy, said President Hassan Rouhani in a state TV broadcast. The U.S. measures, he said, are also hampering imports of medical and food supplies, and that Iran's economy had shrunk over the past 2 years, inflation and unemployment also rising. Crude exports that the nation depends on for most of its foreign exchange are less than 10% of their level before the U.S. withdrew from the multilateral agreement in May 2018. Lebanon's Prime Minister designate stepped down after failing to form a government. leaving the nation rudderless as it struggles to recover from a devastating explosion at its main port last month. Mustafa Adib quit Saturday after a meeting with President Michel Aoun near the capital, Beirut. Adib had the backing of French President Emmanuel Macron, who had called for political reforms and for the country to be run by technocrats unaffiliated with any political parties. Earlier this month, Macron said that about $11 billion in loans and grants pledged to Lebanon at the Paris-hosted CEDRE conference in 2018 won't be released unless Lebanon has enacted reforms. Lebanon is grappling with the deepest economic and political crisis in its recent history. The nation defaulted on $30 billion of international debt this year, and its bickering ruling class has been unable to take steps to redress an economy in tatters and help the population sinking into poverty. The blast at the port is estimated by the World Bank to have caused as much as $4.6 billion in physical damage. Macron's office said Saturday that France won't abandon Lebanon and will comment further at a suitable time. The violence in the Himalayas between India and China points to a rapidly deteriorating relationship. In the barren reaches of the Himalayas, Chinese and Indian patrols keep coming to blows. Both sides have moved in reinforcements backed by artillery, tanks, and fighter jets. China is also building up its presence in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and other contentious points along the Indian Ocean, and Indian citizens are protesting and boycotting Chinese-made goods. The fraying India-China relationship could now bring New Delhi even closer to the United States. Democratic and Republican administrations alike have forged stronger relations with India over the last 2 decades, and the U.S. is India's single most important bilateral relationship. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, devoted a large portion of his pre-recorded UN speech aired Friday to assail India, reflecting the entrenched antagonism between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. Mr. Khan accused his India counterpart, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, of having replicated the Nazis' extremist ideology through his Hindu nationalist agenda and association with the RSS, a right-wing Hindu group. The RSS directs its hatred towards the Muslims and to a lesser extent towards the Christians, Mr. Khan said. India's UN ambassador, Tirumurti, reacted furiously to Mr. Khan's speech and said India had requested a right of reply. The region of Kashmir remains an especially volatile subject for both countries. On Thursday, an outspoken Kashmiri human rights lawyer, Babar Qadri, who frequently tangled with the Indian authorities, was shot to death in his home, making him one of the most high-profile casualties of violence there. President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority used his UN speech on Friday to request the United Nations to convene a conference in early 2021 to help solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He acknowledged that the ground had shifted significantly in Israel's favor over the past year, threatening to marginalize the Palestinians. I wondered while preparing this statement what more I could tell you, after all that I have said in previous statements about the perpetual tragedy and suffering being endured by my people, Mr. Abbas said. Mr. Abbas criticized the Trump administration's peace proposal, which would give chunks of the occupied West Bank to Israel and leave the Palestinians non-contiguous territory and the possibility of a state with limited sovereignty. Mr. Abbas asserted that the only path toward an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement required Israel's withdrawal from occupied lands and independent Palestine along Israel's pre-1967 borders and East Jerusalem as its capital. With that goal in mind, Mr. Abbas said he was asking Secretary General Antonio Guterres to make preparations to convene an international conference with full authority and with the participation of all concerned parties early next year to engage in a genuine peace process based on international law. Washington has threatened to close its embassy in Baghdad over near-daily attacks on its interests in Iraq. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called Iraqi President Barham Saleh last week to deliver an ultimatum. Unless Iraq's government put an end to the rockets raining down on U.S. military and diplomatic sites, Washington would shutter its embassy and recall its troops. The U.S. still has hundreds of diplomats in its mission at the high-security Green Zone in Baghdad and around 3,000 troops based in 3 bases across the country. If the U.S. really closes its embassy, it will leave Kadhimi in a very weak and dangerous position, opening the door for militias to expand and maybe take extreme action against the state. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned in his UN pre-recorded speech Friday that the current global order will be upended if leaders across the planet fail to come together. Trudeau described the COVID-19 pandemic as a wake-up call and argued that organizations formed in the wake of 2 world wars, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were no longer effective because of red tape and because countries repeatedly pushed their own interests. There are few consequences for countries that ignore international rules, Trudeau said, alluding to incidents in nations such as Russia, China, and Iran without specifically naming them. For regimes that think might makes right, few consequences when innocent citizens are arbitrarily detained and fundamental freedoms are repressed, when a plane of civilians is shot from the sky, when women's rights are not treated as humans' rights, when no one has any rights at all. The international approach we relied on since the second half of the 20th century was built on an understanding that countries would work together, Trudeau said, but now the same countries are looking inward and are divided. We need to recognize where we are. The system is broken and the world is in crisis, and things are about to get much worse unless we change. The Justice Department and state attorneys general are closer to filing an antitrust suit against Google over its online search dominance after 2 days of talks, but disagreements over the exact scope of the complaint mean they are more than a week away from doing so. The investigations have looked into several issues related to the company, including contracts with Apple and smartphone manufacturers to ensure Google is the default search engine, and how the tech giant prefers its own products in search results. The Justice Department has been investigating Google for the past 16 months, looking into allegations the company unfairly dominates markets in both online searches and advertising technology. Both sides would prefer to move forward jointly, giving the case bipartisan support and greater resources for what will likely be years-long court battles. President Trump announced his nominee, Judge Amy Barrett, for Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States in the Rose Garden at the White House on Saturday. The following are words from Judge Barrett's acceptance speech. If the Senate does me the honor of confirming me, I pledge to discharge the responsibilities of this job to the very best of my ability. Should I be confirmed, I will be mindful of who came before me. The flag of the United States is still flying at half-staff in memory of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to mark the end of a great American life. She not only broke glass ceilings, she smashed them. For that, she has won the admiration of women across the country, and indeed all over the world. Particularly poignant to me was her long and deep friendship with Justice Antonin Scalia, my own mentor. I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine too. A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold. The President has nominated me to serve on the United States Supreme Court, and that institution belongs to all of us. If confirmed, I would not assume that role for the sake of those in my own circle, and certainly not for my own sake. I would assume this role to serve you. I would discharge the judicial oath, which requires me to administer justice without respect to persons, do equal right to the rich and poor, and faithfully and impartially discharge my duties under the United States Constitution. Well, that's all for today, folks. If you would like to read on any of these topics, please see the description for sources. Subscribe if you'd like to receive a daily news update. Thank you for listening. Be relaxed, be informed, be connected.